She ran from a life of sermons. He spoke with no words at all. In a land torn by war, their silence spoke louder than any vow. Discover the Western love story you were never meant to hear.
The story begins in the high desert of Arizona Territory, the spring of 1872. The wind moves in low, looping currents across the sandstone cliffs, brushing against yucca and ghost sage, and whistling between the narrow mouths of the canyon like voices almost forgotten. At the edge of this land, where trail dust blurs into blood, a woman named Clara Hart wakes before dawn. She stands at the porch of her late husband's cabin, built just outside the fading mining town of Calico Reach. The town has gone quiet in recent years, silver dried up, and the railroad passed it by. What's left are ghosts and rumors, and Clara has learned to live with both. She pours water from the pump, splashes her face, and dries it with her late husband's old bandana, faded blue, frayed at the edges, still bearing the faint scent of cedar and black powder. 5 years ago, Sheriff Jedediah Hart was gunned down while trying to settle a drunken dispute outside the saloon. No monument was built. Just a simple stone at the back of the canyon, marked with his name and the years he served. Clara didn't leave. She didn't sell the land or follow her sister to Tucson. She stayed. Perhaps because she had nowhere else to go. Or perhaps because the canyon whispered things she hadn't yet dared to listen to. That morning, as the sun crests over the canyon rim, Clara notices something out of place, prints in the dust. Barefoot. Fresh. And then she sees him. Not more than 50 yards away, half hidden behind a wall of red brush, crouches a figure. His body is lean and sun-darkened, clothed in animal hide patched with torn military fabric. One arm clutches his side, blood staining the cloth dark and thick. His eyes, sharp as obsidian, meet hers. But he doesn't run. Instead, he holds her gaze. Then slowly, deliberately, he sets down a bundle of sage at the base of her fence and backs away into the brush, disappearing like smoke into stone. Clara doesn't move for a long time. Her heartbeat sounds like thunder in her ears. She knows what she saw. An Apache. In these parts, that means danger. The townsfolk still trade stories of raids and scalping, though the wars have long cooled to ashes. Any native man found near Calico Reach is hunted, no questions asked. But Clara saw something else in that moment, pain. Not just physical, but old and deep. By mid-morning, she takes her horse and rides toward the canyon, to the narrow slot pass known as Widow's Throat. It's a place she rarely visits, save to lay flowers on her husband's grave. But something pulls her now, not fear, but curiosity, or maybe recognition. She finds him there. Collapsed near the creek, one hand grasping his side, the other still clenched around a carved wooden pendant. He opens his eyes as she approaches, but doesn't flinch. Clara could leave him. Ride back. Say nothing. That's what her world would expect. That's what safety demands. But safety died the same day her husband did. Without speaking, she kneels beside him and examines the wound. A bullet, not too deep, likely from a hunting rifle. She cleans it with the creek water, binds it with cloth torn from her petticoat, and builds a fire. He doesn't resist. Doesn't speak. Just watches her with those wide, unreadable eyes. She tries to ask his name, but he only taps 2 fingers against his throat. Mute. Clara nods. Then I'll call you Hawk, she says softly. If you'll let me. A name for a man who sees everything, yet says nothing. That night, she sleeps by the fire with her back to the canyon wall. Hawk sleeps near the flames, the carved pendant pressed close to his chest. He hasn't spoken, but something in his gestures, his careful eyes, the way he watches her, not with suspicion, but something older, sadder, makes her feel safe. Not foolish. Not naive. Safe, in a way she hasn't known since Jedediah died. The next morning, Hawk is gone. No footprints. No trace. Clara returns to her cabin, half believing she dreamt it all. But there, on her porch rail, sits the bundle of sage. Tied around it, a strip of buckskin, etched with symbols, spirals, lines, stars. Not letters. Not words. But communication. A language of silence. She runs her fingers across it, and for the first time in years, she smiles. 2 weeks pass. In town, whispers start. Something stirring in the hills. A sighting here, a stolen rifle there. The sheriff's office stirs with talk of another Apache scout gone rogue, one they thought hanged a year ago. Folks mutter about sending for the rangers again. Clara keeps her head down. Each morning, she finds another bundle on her porch, flowers, roots, small stone carvings. Each time, the buckskin strip carries new symbols. She begins sketching them on scraps of paper, trying to decipher their meaning. Some are obvious: sunrise, river, horse. Others more abstract: 2 joined spirals, a tree with roots shaped like hands. Late one evening, she responds. Not in words, but by placing a carved heart from cedar on the fence post, beside a cup of water and a single, silver dollar, a token her husband once carried for luck. The next morning, the cup is gone, but the heart remains, polished, oiled, placed gently on her porch with a feather tucked inside. Communication without words. Connection without sound. And Clara begins to understand something she hadn't dared name since the war ended, since the night her husband bled out in her arms. Grief speaks in silence. And love sometimes answers through gestures alone. She doesn't know where Hawk goes when he disappears. Whether he sleeps in the canyons or rides through ghost trails only his people remember. But she knows he's watching. Listening. And for the first time in years, she listens back. But out here, nothing remains untouched for long. Eyes see. Tongues wag. And silence, however sacred, can be broken by the snap of a branch, the hiss of a gun, the greed of men who fear what they do not understand. Still, Clara waits. And deep in the canyon, Hawk carves a new symbol into stone, 2 hands, joined beneath a rising moon. The town of Calico Reach did not take kindly to silence. It fed on gossip, suspicion, and the slow rot of fear disguised as law. Sheriff Malden rode in on a pale roan one scorching afternoon, wearing the tin star passed down from dead hands and a permanent sneer like he'd tasted something sour and liked it that way. He wasn't local, no one really knew where he'd come from. But folks tolerated him because he brought order, even if it stank of whiskey and sweat. And because he didn't ask questions before drawing his gun. By late spring, word began spreading. Apache ghost in the canyon, one miner muttered over cards. Stealing chickens. Spying on cabins. Heard he's the one who gutted those trappers up by Devil's Ridge, another added, eyes darting. In Calico Reach, a man didn't need proof to be condemned, just brown skin and silence. Clara felt it before she heard it, the slow tightening of the town's breath, like a snake coiling in dry grass. Doors shut sooner. Men carried rifles on their backs, even to church. Eyes that used to pass over her now lingered too long. She kept her face calm, her posture steady. But inside, the chill had returned. Still, every few nights, Hawk would leave something by her cabin, the petal of a saguaro bloom, a ring of river stones, a feather wrapped in string. Clara answered in kind, pieces of bread wrapped in cloth, an old compass that no longer pointed north, a strip of cloth scented with lavender. They were trading stories and symbols, building something wordless and fragile. But it couldn't last. One night, under the heavy hush of an approaching storm, Clara found a new carving wedged into her windowsill, a jagged arrow pointing down, beneath which was a series of scratches that looked like falling stars. It took her a while to decipher it. Danger. Close. She didn't sleep that night. And when morning came, the wind brought more than dust. Sheriff Malden and 2 men from town came to her door with their boots muddy and their fingers twitching too close to their pistols. "We heard someone's been visiting your property," Malden said. He didn't smile. "Leaving tracks. Maybe stealing." Clara shook her head. "Just coyotes. Or miners passing through. Nothing worth bothering over." He glanced behind her, into the dim interior of her cabin, where an old blanket, clearly native woven, hung beside the hearth. "Strange how trouble always circles back to this house." "That trouble died 5 years ago with my husband," she answered, cool but steady. Malden stepped forward. "You'd tell us if you saw something, wouldn't you, Mrs. Hart?" She met his eyes. "Depends what you call something." A long silence passed before he nodded and turned away. But as he mounted his horse, he looked back once. Not suspicion. Not threat. Confirmation. That evening, Clara rode to Widow's Throat with a single saddlebag and an old lantern. She moved quickly, heart pounding. If they were watching, she'd have one chance to warn him. Hawk was already waiting. He stepped from behind the rocks like part of the stone itself, eyes sharp, nostrils flaring at the sound of her horse's approach. She dismounted, walked straight to him, and placed a hand over his heart. Then, with her other hand, she drew a line in the dirt, 3 X's inside a circle. Their symbol for danger. She pointed toward town. He understood. Nodded once. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small satchel, dried meat, medicine, and a tattered map she found in Jed's old desk. She pressed it into his hand, but he shook his head. Then he did something unexpected. He stepped past her, toward her horse, and pulled something from the saddle, her old locket, the one that held a tiny portrait of her husband and a pressed flower from their wedding day. She hadn't even realized it had fallen. Hawk opened it. Saw the faded memory inside. Closed it gently. Then, with a long breath, he placed it in her palm. He was telling her, "I know you still belong to another." But his eyes, his silence, said something else. "I will not ask. But I will remember." Clara reached for his hand. Not to stop him, not to ask him to stay. Just to feel it once more. Rough, calloused, trembling beneath her touch. Their hands stayed like that for several seconds, until the distant crack of a rifle echoed through the canyon like a snapped promise. They ducked behind stone. Hawk gestured, 3 fingers, sharp to the north. They weren't alone. By morning, smoke curled from the ridge above Clara's cabin. Sheriff Malden stood with 2 men, watching the trail below. One had a spyglass. Another held a rope coiled at his hip. They were hunting now. Clara rode into town late that afternoon, heart stinging with dread. She made a show of buying feed and sewing needles, pretending she hadn't noticed the hush that followed her through the general store or the way the blacksmith paused mid-swing when she passed. As she stepped outside, a boy tugged her sleeve. Dirt-streaked face, no more than 7. "Miss Clara," he whispered, "my pa says you hide him." "The Apache." She crouched, leveled her voice. "Do you believe that?" The boy hesitated. Then shook his head. "No, ma'am. You gave me bread when we had none." She placed a coin in his palm. "Then don't listen to ghosts." That night, at her cabin, she found no sign of Hawk. Just a single feather tied to her fence post with black cord, so tightly wound it cut through the wood. A message. He would not return. Not while danger lingered. But Clara knew the truth, the town had smelled weakness. Her silence had become a threat. And threats, in Calico Reach, didn't last long. Inside her cabin, she pulled down Jed's old rifle and ran her fingers over the cold iron barrel. She hated the weight of it. But hate was often what kept people alive. She didn't know when or where they'd find him. But when they did, she would not be silent. Not anymore. The days passed heavy with heat and hidden eyes. Storms grumbled beyond the horizon, but no rain came. Dust clung to everything, the floorboards, the window panes, the inside of Clara's throat. She moved through her days like a woman dreaming, except the dream had sharp edges and shadows that moved just beyond the corners of her sight. Hawk didn't return. Not to the canyon, not to her porch. The fence stayed bare. No symbols, no feathers, no bundles of desert flowers. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole, but Clara knew better. He was watching. She felt it in her bones. The same way she used to feel Jedediah's quiet footsteps before he came through the door, or the way she knew when her father was about to lose his temper, without a word being said. Some silences carried more weight than shouts ever could. But silence, too, could turn cruel. In town, the talk had changed. It was no longer just rumor, it was accusation. "They say she's protecting one of them," whispered Mrs. Talbot behind her lace fan at church. "You know, the red ones." "I saw her riding up the canyon with a satchel," muttered a man at the saloon. "Didn't look like no church errand." Even the children had stopped waving at her. Clara kept her head up, kept tending to her land, and feeding the goats like nothing had changed. But inside, the walls were closing in. One morning, she found a dead hawk nailed to her gatepost. It took her an hour to pull it down. She buried it near the edge of the canyon and left a single stone on its grave. That night, unable to sleep, she lit a lantern and began carving. She took an old cedar plank from Jed's tool shed, and with her kitchen knife, she began pressing symbols into the wood, not with elegance, but with meaning. A spiral for the past. A fire for danger. A mountain for solitude. And, in the center, two joined lines intersecting beneath a crescent moon. She didn't know if he would ever see it. But it gave her hands something to do while her heart stayed still. A week later, he came back, not to the porch, but the barn. Clara had gone out to fetch a water bucket at dusk and nearly dropped it when she saw him standing in the shadows near the hayloft, half hidden behind the planks, eyes shining in the amber light. His hair was longer, tied back with leather cord. His face gaunter than before. But his eyes, they hadn't changed. She stepped forward, slowly, like approaching a spooked horse. He raised a hand in greeting, then crouched and drew a symbol in the dirt with a stick, a broken circle, surrounded by dots. She didn't recognize it. She crouched beside him and placed a hand over his, light, questioning. He picked up a small rock and tapped it 3 times against the barn floor. Then again, more slowly. Patrols. They were hunting more than just him now. It wasn't just suspicion. It was strategy. They thought he was part of a larger band. That Clara might be a courier, a conspirator, even a lover. She motioned to him, "Stay?" He shook his head. She tried again, tapping her chest, then her palm, "Here." "Safe." Still, he shook his head, more urgently this time. Then, with his finger, he drew a flame beside the barn door, and slashed it once through. If he stayed, they'd burn her down with him inside. Clara's throat tightened. She didn't want him to go again. Not now. Not after all the nights she had waited by the window, praying for just one more glimpse. She took out the cedar plank she had carved and offered it to him. Hawk held it like a holy thing. His fingers traced the lines slowly, reverently. Then he looked up, and for the first time, she saw tears glistening in his eyes. Still, he did not speak. Instead, he pulled from his satchel a pouch made of rough elk hide. From it, he withdrew a locket, hers. The one she thought had been returned. But this one held something different now. Inside was no photo. No flower. Just a folded scrap of buckskin, pressed flat, with a new carving, 2 hands facing upward, open, cradling a star. Hope. Offering. Faith. He pressed it into her hand. She looked at him, this man who had not spoken a single word since she'd met him, and yet had said more to her in symbols and silence than most men did in a lifetime. She reached up and touched his face, just once. A gesture of goodbye. Of gratitude. Of something deeper and unnamed. Then he was gone again, slipping into the shadows, silent as ever. Clara didn't see him again for weeks. But she heard the stories. 2 settlers found dead up near Black Hollow, no clear cause, but their supplies were missing. A rider came through claiming he'd seen a native shadowing a wagon train, keeping distance, but never far. Sheriff Malden grew colder by the day. He came to Clara's porch once more, this time not with questions, but with an order. If you see him again, you let us know. No more warnings. Clara said nothing. He narrowed his eyes. You've got a way of making good men do foolish things, Mrs. Hart. Your husband learned that the hard way. She didn't flinch. You don't get to use his name. He kept this town from becoming the snake pit you've made it. That earned her a hard look, the kind men give right before they strike. But he turned and walked away, leaving a boot print on her floor and something colder in her chest. That night, Clara climbed the ridge behind her cabin and lit a single lantern at the peak, the same place she and Hawk once watched stars fade before dawn. It was their signal. A message, I see you. I'm still here. No reply came. But just before dawn, when she climbed back down and returned to her porch, she found something tucked beneath the doorframe. A piece of tanned leather, folded small. On it, a new symbol. A bird in flight, carrying a branch. He would return. But something told Clara, when he did, it would be for the last time.
The first cold snap came early that year. The canyon wind, once dry and bitter, softened with the hush of winter's approach. Nights turned still, like the land was holding its breath. Clara hadn't lit the lantern in a week. She told herself it was safer that way. That calling him back would only invite blood. But her fingers still itched for the strike of a match, and her eyes scanned the dark ridge every morning before the sun had risen. Then, one afternoon, as the last leaves clung to the cottonwoods, he returned. She was chopping wood behind the barn when she felt it, not a sound, not a shadow, but a presence. A knowing. She turned, and there he was, standing just at the edge of the clearing, where the pines swallowed the light. Hawk. He looked thinner than before, his clothing patched with newer scraps, blue from a Union soldier's coat, brown from a trader's bag. His skin was pale beneath the dirt, and one arm hung stiff at his side. Clara dropped the axe and ran to him. He didn't flinch when she touched him, didn't back away. His breathing was shallow, and a deep gash ran from his ribs to his hip, crudely stitched with plant fiber. She wrapped his good arm over her shoulder and walked him to the cabin without a word. Inside, she settled him onto the cot near the hearth and stoked the fire high. She brought warm broth, boiled willow bark, and gently peeled back the cloth from his wound. He winced, but never cried out. He watched her hands move, eyes tracking every gesture, every breath. That night, she stayed beside him, feeding him in spoonfuls, cooling his forehead, and humming an old song her mother used to sing during storms. The tune had no words. But then again, words had always been unreliable in Clara's life. The next morning, she found a symbol carved into the arm of the chair he'd slept in, her old rocking chair. A spiral, crossed with a tree branch. Time. Home. He was saying thank you. In the days that followed, Hawk slept often, waking only to eat or mark a new symbol on the cedar board Clara had given him weeks before. She left him alone when he needed it, spoke softly when she did speak, and let the rhythm of healing become their shared language. One evening, as the fire cracked low and the canyon wind creaked the shutters, Hawk stirred and reached into his satchel. From it, he pulled a small piece of stone, smooth and shaped like a teardrop. On it, he had carved a new image. 2 hands. One offering, the other receiving. Clara touched the stone. Her eyes blurred. She left the room briefly, returning with a pot of soup and a tiny bundle of dried lilac, a flower that hadn't grown here in years. Her mother's favorite. She placed it beside the stone, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. In silence, something shifted. Not as lovers. Not yet. But something ancient, deeper than flesh, a pact. A knowing. 2 people who had nothing to offer but themselves. And that was finally enough. As Hawk's strength returned, so did the rhythm of days. He helped gather firewood, cleaned the trough, and even repaired the leak in the barn roof. Though he moved carefully and winced now and again, there was something peaceful about him. Clara began to laugh again, quiet, surprised laughter, when he mimed frustration at the stubborn goats, or gently rolled his eyes at her awful sewing. One afternoon, they sat side by side, peeling apples. Clara carved them with steady hands while Hawk turned the skins into thin ribbons. When they finished, he placed a slice in her palm, carved into a heart. She blinked at him. He shrugged, almost shy. Her fingers closed over the shape like it was something fragile. That night, while he dozed near the fire, she took down her late husband's rifle from the mantel. Not to use it. Just to hold it. She remembered Jedediah's strong hands, his laugh, the way he'd tip his hat to her even after they were married. He'd been a good man. Strong. Just. But also limited by the world he knew, by what he thought a wife should be. What a native man should never be. She whispered, "I loved you." Then, placing the rifle back, she added, "But I'm still alive." And somehow, that felt like forgiveness. But peace was never more than borrowed in Calico Reach. 2 nights later, she woke to a thud against the porch. She crept to the window and peeked through the shutter. Nothing but dark. Until she stepped outside and found the object half buried in the snow. A stone. Carved with a cross. The kind missionaries used. And burned into the wood beneath it, in letters meant to shame. Harlot. Clara didn't cry. Didn't even swear. She simply picked up the stone, brought it inside, and placed it beside Hawk's carvings, as if to say, "Let them watch. Let them whisper. I have nothing to hide anymore." When Hawk saw it, his jaw clenched. He picked up his knife and carved a new symbol, a shield over a heart. Then he drew something else, a cabin. Flames beneath it. A warning. Clara understood instantly. If they came again, they wouldn't stop at stones and threats. They would burn her down. Burn them down. Still, neither one suggested running. The next day, Clara rode into town, calm and composed, carrying fresh bread and a pouch of herbs for Mrs. Talbot, just as she used to before the whispers began. People watched her like she carried disease. No one spoke. Even the grocer refused her coin. On the ride back, she saw smoke rising over the northern ridge. Not fire. A signal. She returned home and found Hawk sitting on the porch, his back straight, eyes fixed on the far hills. He handed her another stone, this one blank. He wanted her to decide what came next. She didn't carve anything that night. Instead, she sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder in the fading light. And when the moon rose, Clara took his hand and whispered the first word that had mattered in a long, long time. Stay. The wind held down through Widow's throat like it carried every cruel word ever spoken in Calico Reach. A winter storm was rolling in, full of ice, thunder, and judgment. Clara and Hawk were shelling dried corn by lamplight when they heard it, hooves. Multiple riders. No voices, no laughter, just the steady, grim rhythm of men with purpose. They both froze. She moved quickly, snuffing the lamp, hiding the corn sack, pushing Hawk toward the cellar trapdoor beneath the rug. But he didn't move. His eyes were locked on hers, still, fierce. I won't hide. She shook her head, urgently motioning, please. But he stepped back, pointed to her heart, then to his own. This wasn't stubbornness. It was love refusing to make her lie again. And if the world came to burn them down, then he would stand in the ashes beside her. The first knock came heavy, not rushed, like a judge's gavel striking wood. Clara opened the door. Sheriff Malden stood in the dark, coat dusted with sleet, rifle over his shoulder. 5 men fanned out behind him, local ranchers, a deputy, and 2 she didn't recognize. All armed. None smiling. Evening, Mrs. Hart, Malden said. Her voice came out steady. Something I can help you with? He nodded toward the interior. We've received reports that a known Apache raider's been seen near your property. Then I suggest you ride toward Black Hollow, she said. That's where the tracks lead. Malden's mouth curled. Or maybe the trail ends here. He pushed past her without permission. The others followed. Hawk stood beside the hearth, still as stone. He didn't flinch. Didn't raise a weapon. He simply watched. Malden saw him and didn't even try to hide the satisfaction in his eyes. Well. Look at that. The mute coyote in the flesh. One of the men behind him spat on the floor. Ain't that Jed Hart's blanket he's standin' in front of? Shame. Sheriff must be rolling in his grave. Another man sneered. She's beddin' him. Damn fools probably got her under some savage spell. Clara stepped between them. Enough. Malden raised a hand, signaling silence. Then he addressed her directly. You understand what harboring him means, Clara? He's wanted in 3 counties. Attempted theft, resisting arrest, possibly murder. There's a bounty. And you're sheltering him. He hasn't hurt anyone. You think that matters? Clara didn't move. I've seen what hurt looks like, Sheriff. He's not it. Malden gestured to his men. Take him. 2 stepped forward, rifles raised. Hawk didn't resist. He raised his hands slowly, a silent surrender. But his eyes never left Clara's. As they bound his wrists, she cried out, at least let him explain. Malden laughed. He ain't got a tongue, lady. Even if he did, he wouldn't use it for anything but lies. Clara turned to Hawk, desperate. Tell them. Say something. Let them see who you are. But he stayed silent. Because silence was all the world had ever left him. They dragged him out into the freezing dark. Clara followed, barefoot, tears streaming down her cheeks, shouting at the sky, at the wind, at the men who couldn't see the truth even when it stood with its hands bound, unarmed. Malden stopped her before the edge of the property. "You get one choice," he said. "You can stay and forget this ever happened. Or you can come to the square tomorrow and watch what justice looks like." He mounted his horse, spit into the snow, and rode off into the storm. The others followed, leaving hoofprints and hate behind. Clara stood there long after they disappeared. Long after her breath stopped steaming in the air. Long after her legs stopped trembling. Inside the cabin, she found Hawk's satchel by the fire. Inside it, the locket. Still with the carving of two open hands beneath a star. She clutched it tight and made her decision. Dawn broke over Calico Reach like a blade. The town gathered in the square, bundled in coats, their mouths breathing clouds of judgment. A gallows had been assembled overnight, rough wood, rope already dangling. Hawk stood beneath it, arms bound, feet bare. He didn't look at the crowd. Didn't search for her. He had made peace with their verdict long ago. Then a sound cut through the murmurs, hoofbeats. Clara. She rode straight into the square, dismounted, and climbed the gallows steps. Her hair was wind-blown, cheeks red with fury. She turned to the crowd. "You say this is justice," she shouted. "You call him savage. You call me traitor. But I have lived beside both of you, him and you. And I will tell you what savagery is." She pointed at Hawk. He risked his life to bring water to a wounded horse. She pointed at Malden. "You nailed a dead bird to my door because you were afraid of something you didn't understand." The crowd shifted uneasily. "He has never raised a hand to me," Clara continued, voice cracking but strong. "But you, your words, your silence, your fear, those are the tools of cruelty." Malden stepped forward. "Clara." "No," she snapped. "You will not speak over me again." Then she turned to Hawk, reached into her pocket, and pulled out the locket. She opened it. Inside, two new carvings. A moon. And a seed. Night. And something new beginning. "I'm not asking for mercy," she told the town. "I'm asking you to look at what you've become." No one moved. Then a sound broke the stillness, a child's voice. "Miss Clara?" The boy who had once thanked her for bread stepped forward from the crowd. He held a feather in his hand. "Is he the man who brought me that carving?" he asked. Clara nodded, tears falling freely now. The boy looked up at the sheriff. "Then he can't be bad." Malden's jaw twitched. No one spoke. Then the deputy, a young man named Griggs, lowered his rifle. And said quietly, "We don't have to do this." A murmur moved through the crowd. One by one, rifles were lowered. Eyes turned away. Not in surrender, but in shame. Malden stood alone, fury rising in his face. "You're making a mistake," he growled. "No," Clara said. "You did." And then she cut the rope. Not just the one around Hawk's wrists, but the one hanging from the gallows, too. It hit the platform with a hollow thud. They didn't stay. By nightfall, Clara had packed what little she owned, blankets, dried food, the cedar board marked with symbols, and left Calico Reach behind. She didn't need the town. She had stories carved in stone, and a man who'd taught her to listen between the lines. They rode through the canyon as the stars came out, silent, side by side. And somewhere, deep in the earth, justice began to whisper a different tune. By the time the moon had swelled full again, the preacher's daughter was no longer the same girl who'd once fled from her father's wrath and the choking silence of a cold household. And the mute Apache scout, who once believed himself unworthy of anything soft, anything sacred, had begun to believe, in flickering moments, that some things were meant to be held on to. But peace, in that land and in those days, was a thing stitched together with fragile thread. Word came like a dust storm: a patrol of soldiers had seen Apache tracks too close to a settler's ranch. The threat of conflict sparked like dry grass under flint. Men were gathering. Guns, too. And as before, the girl Ella stood between two fires. They hadn't spoken it aloud, not in words, but she knew what was coming. His eyes had that faraway look again, like he was already riding out. His hands carved no symbols that day. She found him by the river, sharpening a blade against stone, though there was no need for it. The edge was already clean. "You're leaving," she said. Not a question. He looked up. Nodded once. "Because of them?" A longer pause. Then, a gesture, 2 fingers swept across his heart, then pointed toward the mountains. Toward his people. Ella's throat tightened. She knelt beside him. "Will they listen to you? Will they even care that you're trying to stop this?" He turned his palms up. Uncertain. Tears welled. "Why does it always have to be this way? Why can't we just be?" He reached into his pouch and took out the smooth piece of bark he always carried. On it, he carved slowly, carefully. A tree with no roots. A figure beneath it, hand reaching up. Then, beside it, a second image. 2 trees, rooted beside one another, branches tangled above. He handed it to her. She understood. One alone would wither. 2 together might weather the storm. "I want that," she whispered. "But I'm scared." He traced a line down her cheek with the back of his fingers, then took her hand and placed the carving in it, curling her fingers closed. Then, before the sun had burned off the morning mist, he was gone. Days passed. The patrols came closer to the canyons. Tension built like a spring stretched too tight. Ella stayed at the edge of town, avoiding both sides, clutching the small carving until her knuckles ached. She waited for a sign. Any sign. It came in the form of a rider, a boy from a nearby homestead, eyes wide with fear. "There was a meeting," he gasped. "Apache and settlers. Someone fired. Don't know who. Shots. Then, chaos." Her breath caught. "Was he there?" she asked. The boy shrugged. "Couldn't tell. Just smoke and noise. But someone said a scout tried to stop it. Got caught in the crossfire. They say he's dead." She didn't believe it. Couldn't. But for a week, the trail was cold. No word. No sightings. Just rumors. Ella wandered through the canyon, past their shelter, to the place by the river where he'd once traced symbols into the mud. The water had erased them all. It was as if the silence had reclaimed him. She screamed into the canyon walls, the echo her only answer. And then, on the 10th night, beneath the crescent moon, she found something. A single line of symbols carved freshly into the bark of their old tree. Not many. Just a few. A hand. A heart. A flame. A mountain. And beneath them, a star. She gasped. It was him. He was alive. She waited. And on the 3rd day, he came. Limping, wrapped in cloth, one arm pressed against his ribs. But breathing. Alive. He collapsed near the fire ring and she ran to him, weeping, laughing, not caring how the night swallowed the sound. She helped him sit, tended his wounds, and held him through the darkness. He carved no words. He didn't need to. But in the morning, as they sat watching the sun rise over the cliffs, she brought out the bark carving he'd once given her. The trees. The intertwined branches. She held it up and whispered, "I want this still." Even after everything. He took it from her, stared at it, then added something new. A sapling. Small. At their base. She laughed through tears. "We'll grow something new. Even here." The war didn't end, not really. But in that quiet canyon, they carved out a piece of peace. One small life. One flame that didn't flicker out. Word of the mute Apache and the preacher's runaway daughter spread like wildfire, though most didn't know the whole truth. Some said it was a story, a legend. Others claimed to have seen them riding together, vanishing into the canyon fog. But Ella knew the truth. And every time the wind rustled through the trees, every time her fingers brushed a carved symbol on smooth bark, she remembered. There are loves that need no words. Only faith. Only fire. And a place where silence is sacred.
If their silent love moved you, don't let it end here. Like, subscribe, and share this story so their whispers echo beyond the canyon.